The defendant in Court 11 of the Old Bailey spoke only to answer the charges against him, 3 of downloading child pornography and 1 of possessing a pedophile manual. "How do you plead?" the judge asked him. "Guilty," he replied. "Guilty, guilty, guilty." "We did not see his face." He was speaking via video link resembling a television mounted above the well of the courtroom, but the screen was wrapped in brown parcel paper. All that was visible was the shadow of a head occasionally moving, very slightly, back and forth. Most commonly, it is victims of sexual abuse who give evidence in this way. Or, in exceptional circumstances, individuals like Jon Venables. Jon Venables is a name that is intrinsically associated with that of Robert Thompson and grainy CCTV footage capturing frame by haunting frame the moment they abducted 2-year-old James Bulger from a shopping mall on Merseyside in 1993. The toddler was found 2 days later on a railway embankment in Walton with horrific injuries inflicted with an iron bar and bricks. His body was left across a track where it was cut in 2 by a train to make it look like an accident. Their crime was called an act of unparalleled barbarity, a description as true today as it was then. At the time, Jon Venables and Robert Thompson were both 10. Whose idea was it to kill him? Venables was asked in his police interview. It was Robert's idea, he told detectives. Venables was more photogenic than his friend. He appeared the sweeter of the two. He was led, and Robert Thompson was the leader. In other words, is how the narrative played out in the media. Thompson was the boy, after all, who started throwing the bricks at him. James. Yet, it was Venables, not Thompson, who came before the Old Bailey this week. It was Venables, not Thompson, who has now been caught accessing child pornography for the second time since his release on license in 2001 from an 8-year jail sentence for the kidnap and torture of James Bulger. And it is Venables, not Thompson who, the court heard, poses a high risk of serious harm to children. Among the disturbing material found on his laptop, hidden behind the headboard of his bed in his flat, was a document with detailed instructions on how to have sex with little girls. Safely. The content is supposed to have been based on the experience of the author with his own 2 daughters. Venables was jailed for 40 months for these offenses. The case has led to calls from the family of James Bulger for Venables to be stripped of his lifelong anonymity. He and Thompson, now both 35, were given new identities when they were freed all those years ago at a cost of millions of pounds to the taxpayer. James' parents, who are no longer together, were in the Old Bailey for Venables' latest court appearance. How unbearably painful it must have been for them to hear, albeit briefly, his voice and to learn that he continues to be a danger to society on the eve of the 25th anniversary of their son's murder on Monday. A documentary about the tragedy, The Bulger Killers, was Justice Done, shown on Channel 4 a few days ago, attracted criticism for appearing to have sympathy for Venables and Thompson. Should they simply have thrown away the key, as some suggested in the aftermath of the film, and condemned the boy murderers to life in prison at 10 years of age? While Venables has persistently reoffended, Thompson appears to have been successfully rehabilitated and led a trouble-free life. I believe personally that we will be unlikely ever to hear from him again, the solicitor who represented Thompson and is still in contact with him told the program. Either way, recent events have once again turned the spotlight on one of the darkest episodes in British criminal history and the two boys who became the youngest children in the 20th century to be tried and convicted for murder. The law prevents us revealing any details that could lead to their identification. Their whereabouts are known only to the probation service and the police. Robert Thompson has had a number of jobs since his release. At one time he was working in a shop, then a public venue. Jon Venables was once employed as a nightclub bouncer. He was living in the West Midlands, a detail which emerged at the Old Bailey this week. Their lives as adults may have turned out very differently, but they had a shared past in Liverpool. Two boys, born 10 days apart in August 1982. Two boys who formed a friendship at school which began by stealing sweets and toys together, then throwing stones at old ladies' windows, swearing at shopkeepers, and chillingly stoning birds and torturing cats, a pattern of delinquency that eventually escalated to murder. Officers who worked on the Bulger investigation could find no other plausible motive than Venables and Thompson were born wicked. Doesn't the fact, though, that Thompson, the so-called ringleader, has managed, against all expectations, to steer clear of controversy for all these years suggest another explanation? That the answer to the evil they committed may be partly explained by their backgrounds, both harrowing stories of abuse, alcoholism, and violence. Many commentators regarded Venables' parents, Neil and Susan, a working-class couple from Liverpool, respectable compared with the Thompsons. But both had been treated for depression and were living apart at the time of the trial. John's behavior deteriorated after his father Neil, a one-time forklift driver, left the marital home in Scarsdale Road, Norris Green, when John, the middle of three children, was 3 years old. If he didn't get his way with other children, when he was a little older, he would get the family Rottweiler to bark at them. At school, he threw tantrums and exhibited increasingly disturbing behavior. He would sit back and hold his desk and rock backwards and forwards, moaning and making strange noises, said one of his teachers. On one occasion, he was found hanging upside down like a bat from his peg in the cloakroom. His mother Susan was not always around to look after him. A regular visitor to local pubs, she was in the habit of leaving her children unsupervised at home. On one occasion, police were called after the children, aged 7, 5, and 3, had been left alone for 3 hours. John spent a few days a week with his father, whom friends insisted was a devoted parent. but it emerged that he regularly rented violent or pornographic videos, although Mrs. Venables denied that their son ever watched them. The murder brought Jon's parents back together. They became familiar faces at Vardy House, a small 8-bed section of the Red Bank Secure Unit in St. Helens on Merseyside, where their son had been detained. Every detail of his detention was logged and forwarded to the Home Office. One episode did escape scrutiny, however. Shortly before his release, when he was 17, Venables was the subject of a BBC documentary which revealed he'd had sex with a female member of staff. The woman accused of sexual misconduct was suspended and never returned. Still, Venables' release went ahead in 2001, and he was given a new name. Despite the stringent restrictions surrounding his identity, details of his life in the outside world leaked into the public domain. By 2002, Venables was living independently and had reportedly begun a relationship with a single mother who had a 5-year-old child. By 2005, now aged 23,